welcome to episode 351 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Joining me in a moment is Milos Zlatkovic. He's the founder and CEO of Mily Technologies, and we're going to be talking about out-of-home delivery. We'll talk about the convenience of out-of-home delivery to consumers. There are some of the capacity issues that we have when it comes to managing out-of-home delivery networks and various other things like that, all to do with not perfecting, but optimizing out-of-home delivery networks. This episode is brought to us by Mily Technologies. So coming up in just a moment, Milos Zlatkovic, founder and CEO of Mily Technologies. Joining me on the line is Milos Zlatkovic. Milos is the founder and CEO of Mily Technologies. We're going to get into some big out-of-home delivery discussion today, Milos. And I suppose it's interesting talking to you because Mily Technologies is a tech company and you're really focused on those delivery analytics. I'm sure you've got some really interesting perspectives to share with us. Out-of-home delivery, though. In the delivery sector, I want to really ask you about this. I'll start with a perspective. Out-of-home delivery, it's often presented to us in the delivery sector as it's guaranteed first-time delivery, right? We always hear that. It's basically guaranteed first-time delivery. But we still have to talk about what the customers want as well. And at the risk of making this all about me, Milos, and I'll let you talk in a moment. Don't worry, everybody. Before we hit record today, we were just talking about, we all have our different experiences, don't we, of out-of-home delivery. Right. So I suppose even before you started before you founded Mily Technologies, you had an experience as a customer of out-of-home delivery, right?
Absolutely. So I used to live in Denmark for almost 6 years, and Denmark was one of the countries where out-of-home actually was very early adopted, and the convenience of actually having a locker close to your home actually led to quite of an adoption. And this was also later on adopted in other countries as well. But I think Denmark was one of the pioneers for sure.
Yeah, I used to live across the road from a parcel locker. And so I used it all the time because it was more regular delivery until, of course, it started getting full all the time. We're going to talk about full lockers later on. But now I've moved house, everybody, and there's no parcel locker within QE of where I live. But there is a post office and a pickup point. And what I always find interesting when I'm shopping online and I want to use the out-of-home delivery point, the out-of-home delivery point has an earlier cutoff than residential delivery. Mm-hmm. So I've had to learn, as a consumer, you learn these things, right? You learn about where's your nearest delivery point, at what time is your cutoff for delivery and all those sorts of things. And the importance for me really as a consumer, not as somebody who's in the industry, is it's just about location really, right? And that sort of convenience.
Absolutely. I can share a story. So in Munich, where I live today, the nearest locker is almost 700 meters away. And guess when I'm picking up my parcels there? Very last minute. It's really not in a way. And I really don't want my parcel to go away. So I wait for the very last minute to pick it up. On contrary, for example, when I lived in Copenhagen, it was just 150 meters away and I picked it up as soon as possible. So that really dictates also the capacity and how long the parcel actually stays in the locker, and the convenience of how close it is and is it in my way really plays a huge difference.
And your behavior as a consumer for the delivery company, it's better when you're collecting it straight away as opposed to waiting until day 2 or day 3 or whenever it is the cutoff point for being in the locker. From what you've seen then with the data that you handle and things like that, what's the data reflect in all of this? What's the data say about location of lockers near people or speed of collection, all those sorts of things?
So it's interesting if you look at different markets, it definitely plays into people's behaviors. One dominant factor is really where people live. There's always this debate whether people collect it closer to where they work or closer to their home. If you look at the data, it is predominantly where people live. And I would say the location plays a factor there simply because, as discussed earlier, if it's close to my home, I will pick it up. actually sooner. Which actually it's a problem for everyone who wants to build a network, because that means you need to have a high coverage and high density in order to actually cater for the convenience.
And getting to that point, though, is often the discussion, isn't it? We see delivery companies that are prepared to do a trial. It's a very limited trial of something, and yet to make it success, it seems that to make out-of-home delivery a success, there has to be a density of network. So how do you bridge that gap between a limited trial and then rolling out either a network of PUDO points or a network of lockers or a combined network?
I think we like to say that it's rolling out networks is all about managing risks. So if you think of it, if you want to roll out a huge network, there's a huge risk involved in terms of high cost to do so, and you are not really certain whether it will work or not. Of course, if you are in a market where lockers are just starting, the risk is higher. If it's more mature, then you might have more certainty, but then you also have other players who are in the same game. So that makes things even more challenging. So the way we like to approach it, and what we embedded basically also in the product, is how do you peel off different risks one at a time in order to basically bring more certainty and de-risk the entire investment.
So de-risking, I like this idea. So how do you do that though? I mean, at the risk of turning this into a consulting session, but really, how do you de-risk this idea? Because what we often don't talk about when we talk about investing in a PUDO network or a parcel locker network is that it has to be funded somehow. So you got to find the money, and we live in risk-averse times. So how do we do that?
So one interesting thing we noticed very early on is that if you want to roll out a network, there are different parties that are involved. So let's say you have someone who might be in charge of lockers. You might have someone who is in charge of PUDOs. There's an operational side of things. So who is going to fill in the lockers and empty them? You need to negotiate about the locations, and there's a legal aspect as well there, and then you cannot place it everywhere. So there are certain restrictions. Let's say you cannot place a locker at the UNESCO site. I mean that's simply not going to work. So what we learned is that what you can do is actually bridge and bring all these people together so that they can actually work together on a network. The problem is that each of those people might approach them with their own set of data and own set of reality and issues, constraints. But it's very hard to solve a big problem if everyone is actually having their own approach, but they don't have a single place where they can overlap and do things together. So a lot of it actually had to do with us enabling all those people to be in one place, look at the same data, and basically contribute to each other's points of view. So it sounds like collaboration pretty much is, but everyone is looking at the same data so we can derive exactly the same conclusions and basically contribute to each other's point of view. This actually helps a lot in reducing the risk and reducing the things that might get slipped. It's because simply we are contributing to it altogether.
Now, we've talked a bit about convenience, and we've sort of leapt off into how do you set up an out-of-home delivery network. I mentioned earlier about the problem of parcel lockers being full, and I see it a bit now where, as a consumer, when I want to have something delivered to a parcel locker and the parcel locker is full, and you hear about people in different markets saying, I'd love to get it delivered to a parcel locker, but they're always full. But we don't hear that about PUDOs so much. Well, maybe a little bit, but there's the PUDOs sort of have could we describe it as a sweet spot where a PUDO doesn't want too few parcels, but they don't want too many parcels. So how can we tackle this question of capacity and sort of balancing the load across the network so that we've got convenience, what we talked about before, but we're also managing the capacity in a sensible way?
That's a very interesting problem with the out-of-home networks, is that at the beginning you are looking to get as much volume as possible to get the return on investment, and then later on you end up in a problem where maybe it's not enough and you have maybe too much. What's interesting with PUDOs compared to lockers is that you don't really control the capacity. So this might be a location that you share with other carriers as well. And if that's the case, your capacity simply fluctuates. So in terms of, let's say, coverage, you might be covering a certain area because you partner with someone who owns a location there, but you don't really maybe have a capacity to fulfill that need. Another problem that we've seen is if depending on the location, if it's working too well, that might be a problem as well, because this might be a shop that is actually doing something else on the side, and then this is basically a side business. If this is forcing them to hire a full-time person to handle the parcels, that might be an issue. On contrary, you might partner because you expected certain volume, but that's not coming, and then you're still unsatisfied. So that might actually lead to some shops leaving the certain carrier simply because they are either not satisfied with what they get, or it's too good and then it's still causing problems. So definitely PUDOs require different ways of handling compared to lockers. It can also be applicable to them if you are using an agnostic network. You still don't own the full capacity. So that might also lead to certain issues. And this is what makes the whole problem quite interesting, because at the end of the day, you don't want parcels to sit in a warehouse and queue up, basically, but you want them to be delivered as fast as possible.
There's another issue in all this as well, isn't there, which is about making the PUDO operator happy. Mm-hmm. And how you make them happy is what we were just talking about, getting the capacity right or the load right. It's getting the payment right. It's getting the contracts right. It's getting the actual technology that they use right as well. You mentioned those PUDO points that have agreements with multiple carriers or multiple networks. So you might have one network that has 3 carriers attached to it, one that's a dedicated network, and then you might have an Amazon machine as well, or whatever it might be. They don't want to be dealing with 3 different pieces of hardware on their counter, which is probably already cluttered with all the stuff they have to do with their regular business. So this is something else that we have to sort of confront when we're talking about the setting up PUDO networks. We're often just thinking, is it going to be carrier agnostic or carrier specific? But there's much more when you delve into it. And then we come to issues like churn, keeping people in the network. Anyway, Milos, I'm starting to editorialize a little bit too much here. You wanted to share an example from the UK about how this issue of proximity and capacity can be solved. Do you want to just sort of introduce us to the approach that you had there?
Yeah, so we recently looked at the UK market, and it's the most mature market in Europe, definitely when it comes to e-commerce. And if you look at it in terms of coverage, a lot of players are doing quite well. I mean, you have DPD doing well, Amazon is doing great, but this is where you can see they solve the problem of coverage in terms of they are actually close to people. However, if you look at the capacity, that's a different issue. So you might be close to people, but if you take, for example, also returns into calculation. So it's not really about just delivering. It's also about how do we actually facilitate great returns. Those are completely 2 different ways to optimize for the location placement. And this is where combining basically PUDOs and lockers is actually a great solution, because based on the historical data, you can actually facilitate lockers where they are needed, especially in terms of PUDOs where you don't have the full capacity. And this has proved to be a very good way. We actually published an article about it. What are different players can they do in order to basically improve the capacity and the coverage that they have? I think this is something that other countries will also follow, mainly because this is, as I said, the most mature market. We're going to see the similar trends reaching in other parts of the world as well.
So what do you mean by integrating those parcel lockers and PUDO networks more? I mean, we're talking about the PUDO operator putting parcels into the lockers, or are they helping with the lockers, or is it just about the location and communicating with the consumers?
It is about the location, but it is about, for example, if you see most of the operators actually optimize for the delivery. But if you flip the coin and simply say, okay, we want to now to look at the returns, we are not able to actually have the same coverage that we thought we have. So now we actually need to do things differently. You can complement the network. I think this is another interesting aspect in the mature markets. When you start, you might partner with different retailers because they offer you the locations, and this is what you continue with. However, as the network grows, you might get even more options, but this is now you're not interested in any partner. You need to find partners that are complementing your network in both coverage and the capacity. This is something that we've looked into, and this is something that definitely can help in finding the right locations to complement the network, as I said, in both capacity and the coverage.
When it comes to managing returns in the PUDO network, you mentioned about optimizing delivery. So we're talking always about, as you said, it's a pipe going in one direction. Whereas we all know that pipes don't really go in one direction in the delivery world. You don't want to have empty vans. You also want to fill up the vans.
Absolutely.
And you don't want to then just send out it almost sounds like a postal network otherwise. If you send out one van in the morning to deliver and send another van in the afternoon to collect, it might not be the most efficient way to do it. So what have you seen there? How can we drive efficiencies in out of home when it comes to dealing with returns?
So this has to do with, again, different patterns and that occur at certain locations. So if you look at urban or rural areas, people might not have the same habits in a way of picking up their parcels. So this is a factor that needs to be taken into consideration if you want to reach more than what's called 100% utilization rate. So if you want to go beyond 100%, you need to understand how you can fill in the locations multiple times per day. The only way to do that is to really understand the habits and behaviors of people collecting parcels there and returning the parcels, so you can actually have the optimal locations regardless whether it's urban or rural. But this is something that we've seen that actually leads to quite a good results.
So looking at the products that you have at Mily Technologies, you were just talking about understanding consumer patterns, all these sorts of things. So is this part of the whole package that you offer? I mean, being able to help, whether it's a retailer or a delivery company, understand these sorts of patterns so they can, optimize the networks?
So I like to call the platform we developed as a collection of different solutions, because the last mile in general is not something that can be solved with only one product. So what we understood when we started early on is that, okay, we solved one problem, now we need to solve a second problem, now we solve a third problem. And these solution combinedly is basically what we offer today. For example, if the company is just starting with the out-of-home networks, so they need to deploy thousands of locations, we can help them find locations based on the data they have and the goals that they are looking to achieve. Or it can actually be you already have an existing network, but you know that some locations are working better than others. What are the steps to take to actually improve the locations that are not working and then still expand, all basically following the budgetary constraints, because that's there's also, of course, always a budget in so.
I hear this often when you're talking to particularly postal operators. They've started down the road, might have even been an early adopter of parcel lockers, say 15 years ago. But back then it was a bit of a novelty, or there was just one person in the organization that was responsible for it and was driving. And now it's that, you don't know where to put it in put out-of-home delivery in the organisation. You don't know how to integrate it with your physical network, or do you have to partner? So these are all the questions I hear constantly in the delivery world, which is basically comes to how do we optimise this delivery option so that we can – it sounds awful, everybody, but so that we can make money, right? Because ultimately, if you don't make money, you got no business, right?
Absolutely. And I'll circle back to what I mentioned at the beginning. Logistics is a collaborative industry. A lot of people work together to get parcels from point A to point B. I think what we try to do is to really make it easy for people to work together, because it's very hard for one person to control the entire network, and there's too many things going on. However, if we make it very easy to work together, and we can basically make a parallel with all the other tools where we collaborate with other people, how would we do it without that collaborative factor? This is something that I believe has been lacking in the logistics industry in general, but we are focused on the last mile here. These things actually make it easier for people to make those decisions together. And as I said, single points of truth where we all look at the same data and we can contribute to each other's point of view. This actually makes a huge difference in how people build, manage, or scale their networks.
Milos, I'm sure there are plenty of questions out there from our listeners about how to bring in convenience, how to improve capacity, and how to optimize out-of-home delivery networks. People who want to find out more about Mily Technologies, how should they get in contact with you?
Definitely more details are available on our website, and LinkedIn is a place to find me or some of my colleagues.
And what's the address for the website?
MilyTech.com.
MilyTech.com. I'll stick a link to the website on the postalhub.com webpage. You know what I mean, everybody. The episode page on the site, and a link to the LinkedIn page as well, so you can get in contact with Milos and the team and find out more about what Mily Technologies can do in the last mile. Milos Zlatkovic, founder and CEO of Mily Technologies, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today. Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Alistair Cochrane, the Chief Operating Officer at Royal Mail. Don't miss any of these great episodes, any of these, not just that one. There are other ones coming up. Don't miss any of them, including the one I just mentioned. Subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, the Amazon thing, Spotify, whatever. Subscribe in all of them. And while you're there, leave a rating. That'd be nice. And if you find the time, a little review saying how wonderful it is, how it brightens up your day, how it makes your visits to the dentist or whatever it is that you do when you're listening to this better. Thanks in advance. If you want to subscribe to my newsletter, and I know you do, go to thepostalhub.com and follow the links. There's my newsletter I send out whenever there's a new episode. There's the Daily Delivery Digest, which has all the headlines from around the delivery world direct to your inbox daily. And what else? Oh, the Post Office Digest. That's hidden though. You have to know someone to get on that list. It's a little bit exclusive. Email me, Ian, at my email address, ian@thepostalhub.com, and I'll send you the details. That's enough, I reckon. Let's wrap it up here. Thanks for listening in. I'm Ian Kerr. I'll catch you next time on the Postal Hub podcast.